Thank you, Acting President. And I rise to speak in favour of this bill. I think it's worth briefly revisiting how we found ourselves here. Back in May, it was reported that Worker Holdings Limited had applied for planning consent for the partial demolition of the Crown and Anchor Hotel to make way for the construction of multi-level student accommodation. Now, at that time, the Greens were one of the first groups to come out in opposing this redevelopment. And not because we don't want to see more student accommodation in the city, Acting President. Of course we want to see more student accommodation. But our view was that we didn't need to bulldoze or radically alter one of our iconic pubs in order to accommodate that kind of development. There's lots of vacant sites in the CBD already that could have been activated to make way for more student accommodation. So we never accepted the argument that a private developer should be able to acquire that site and in effect get rid of the pub. It doesn't make sense. Cities, after all, are all about balance, and we need to have live music venues. We need to have iconic pubs in our city, as well as more student accommodation. What followed from that time was a huge community grassroots campaign that has saved this South Australian icon from destruction. Over the course of several months, over 15,000 people signed a petition calling on the state government to save the Cranker, and a record 1,328 submissions were made to the State Commission Assessment Panel. That is more than double those that have been received in any previous public consultation for a development. At two rallies on the 28th of April and the 18th of August, thousands of South Australians took to the streets to demand that the state government save their pub. I want to take this opportunity to praise all of those who have been campaigning on this issue and to recognise their great work in activating the community. In particular, I acknowledge the work of Evan Moroney, Patrick Mayer and all of the other members of the Save the Cranker Committee for their tireless work. It has been a privilege to engage with them over the last few months. This is an example of what we can do when the Parliament works in unity with the community. The Greens are very proud to have stood with the community at every step of the way, raising this issue at every level of government. We've raised it in Town Hall, we've raised it here in the State Parliament, and of course this was also discussed on the floor of the Federal Senate. So the Greens are very proud of the work that we have done to fight to save this iconic pub. I do also want to acknowledge the work of other members of Parliament. In particular, I acknowledge the work of the Honourable Michelle Lensink, who has done a lot of work on this issue, engaging around this one, as she does on many important issues. We share our love of camp, Acting President. From the start, the Greens and the community were told by the state government that there was simply nothing that could be done. Now, this was that the government came out at the start and said there's nothing we can do on this, it's not possible, we have a rules-based system. Well, there's an old saying we have in the Greens, if you don't like the rules, you change them, Acting President, and that's what we're doing today. Indeed, when I brought a motion to this place calling on the Malinauskas government to oppose any partial demolition or adaptive reuse of the Crown and Anchor, the reply of the government was clear. They have no ability to intervene in the decision-making process. Well, hey presto, less than 3 months later we now have a bill before us that will save the Cranker and give other live music venues the protection they deserve. This is precisely what the Greens were calling for. At that time, we were told it couldn't be done. We have a rules-based system. We can't do anything. We can't intervene. Well, thanks to people power, finally, we've seen a change in position of the government. The power of community activism is on display here in the Parliament today. I have always believed, Acting President, that it is the Parliament that makes the law, but it's the community that drives change. And that's what we've seen here. And we do welcome the fact that the government has finally listened to the community. Acting President, it's important to note that the Cranker is just the latest in a string of iconic buildings and live music venues that have been targeted by developers. Over the last decades, we've seen the producers on Grenfell Street and Perry Street, Tivoli, close their doors, and other venues like the Austral no longer host live music. Their loss has dealt a heavy blow to Adelaide's proud music history and tradition, and this bill will finally give the Cranker and the city's most iconic remaining live music venues the improved protections that they deserve. And I acknowledge, Acting President, your work in advocating for a committee on live music, which look forward to seeing getting off the ground in due course, because that's an important next step. This bill provides that the Crown and Anchor cannot be demolished, its height cannot be increased through the addition of more storeys, and a change in use of the land cannot occur without the concurrence of the Minister for Planning after a community consultation process for not less than 4 weeks. It also enhances protections for other live music venues in the Adelaide CBD by designating it as a live music venue area and specifying that new residential developments within 60 metres of a venue must include noise attenuation measures to reduce the potential for complaints. Well, we welcome those provisions, Acting President. This is precisely the kind of intervention that the Greens had been calling for, and so we welcome that. But we will also be moving to amend the bill so that the provisions of the Heritage Places Protection of State Heritage Places Amendment Bill that passed the other place several weeks ago will apply to the Crown and Anchor. This was a Greens private members bill, which was to increase the penalties that applied for demolition by neglect. That is the practice where you see an owner of a property allowing it to fall into disrepair. Because the penalties were previously so low, there was really nothing to compel the developer to take action to ensure that these properties were being held to an appropriate standard, and they could therefore be bulldozed. Well, the Greens worked with the Malin Alskis government to close that loophole. We passed a private members bill in the Parliament during the last sitting. This amendment, the suite of amendments that I will be moving, will insert those provisions into the way in which the Cranker is managed in the future. That will ensure, of course, that if there is any change of ownership, or if the developer decides in the future that they are not going to take action to keep that building up to an appropriate standard, that the Heritage Minister can intervene, slap them with fines and take action. And I do acknowledge, as the Honourable Michelle Lensink has mentioned in her comments, her and I have spoken about this, and I welcome the Liberals' support for that and appreciate that. Mr President, the Cranker has been saved, but without further reforms to our planning and heritage laws, South Australia's iconic places will remain at risk of being lost forever. And I do agree with my colleagues that this demonstrates the flaws in our planning system. If the planning system was actually working and meeting community expectations, you would not need to see legislative intervention like this. This really is the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the flaws in our state's planning laws and our heritage laws. It is clear that our heritage protection laws, which are focused on built form aesthetics, do not extend protections to ongoing use or the broader cultural and social value of these buildings. The result is that heritage places which are of huge social and cultural significance to our community could be bought by developers and gutted with only the facade remaining. What this debate has exposed is that heritage is about much more than just bricks and mortar. It's about the heart and soul of our state, our city and our community. And the government must now move to amend our heritage laws to reflect this. It must also strengthen the role of people in our planning system and give communities more of a say in planning the cities that they want to live in. I don't agree with the views of the Property Council that it's not for advocates, politicians and local councillors to be involved in these decisions, and that these decisions should simply be made by unelected officials. It is the role of Parliament, Council, as the people's representatives, to actually give effect to the views of the people and ensure that we have a planning system that suits their needs. We do really need to revise the thresholds in the planning, development and infrastructure regulations that push planning assessments of medium-sized developments from council assessment panels to the State Commission assessment panel. At present, the threshold is just $10 million for developments in the City of Adelaide, which means that the council is stripped of its role in most development proposals. And that's why I think there is such a discomfort with so many of the decisions that are being made, because the community is not having an appropriate say. The Greens have also proposed a community right to buy, which is modelled on similar legislation that has worked well in the United Kingdom. This would enable local councils, community organisations and charities to be able to nominate land or buildings that are of community value for inclusion on a register, which would be managed by the Minister for Planning. Once listed, a building or a piece of land would become an asset of community value and remain on the register for 5 years. During that time, the owner would have to apply to the minister should they wish to change its use or to sell the building, and the community would have a right to express interest as a potential buyer during an 8-week period. The minister would consider applications from councils, community organisations and charities, and if an expression of interest is approved, a 12-month moratorium is put on the asset to enable the community group or council to raise funds for the offer. This would provide a lifeline to our iconic pubs and stop the endless decline of live music venues and SA's cherished places. And the Greens are going to continue to push for that, as well as other changes to our planning laws. I do agree with the comments made by the Honourable Michelle Lensink and the Honourable Connie Benares that this bill does set a precedent. If the state government has the power to save the cranker, then it has the power to fix our state's heritage and planning laws too. And the Greens will continue to stand with the community in fighting for a heritage and planning regime that serves the interests of the community rather than developers. And I certainly put the government on notice, Acting President, that next time there is a development proposal that totally offends community sentiment, the Greens will come back knocking once again for this parliament to intervene, because we now know that when there is a will, there is a way. And I think this should actually send a shiver down the spine of all those developers in our state that are seeking to impose inappropriate development on our city. Because with people power, we can intervene and we can strike a better balance in our state's planning laws. I do welcome the government's intervention in this instance, and I'll have a bit more to say in the committee stage and a few questions of the government. Thank you.